The year is 200 AD. The Emperor Septimius Severus sits upon his dais, his face etched with a mixture of disgust and resolve, looking down at the blood-soaked sands of the arena. The crowd is not cheering for a hulking barbarian or a seasoned male killer. They are screaming for women. The air is thick with the scent of sawdust, sweat, and the metallic tang of fresh blood, but the Emperor has seen enough. In his hand, he holds the power to end a phenomenon that has simultaneously thrilled and scandalized the Roman Empire for centuries. But to understand why he is about to ban it, we must first step back into the roar of the Colosseum, beneath the scorching Mediterranean sun, to witness the spectacle he sought to destroy. When we dream of the Roman arena, our minds conjure images of muscle-bound men, the Spartacus figures grinding their heels into the dirt. We hear the clash of heavy iron and the deep, guttural shouts of male combatants. Yet history has obscured a darker, more exotic chapter of this brutal theater. Standing shoulder to shoulder with the men, and often drawing louder gasps from the 50,000 spectators, were the Gladiatrixes. These were not myths, and they were not mere sideshows. They were warriors who bled, killed, and died for the entertainment of the mob. To the average Roman citizen, the Gladiatrix was a creature of paradox, rare, exotic, and fundamentally confusing. She was a disruption of the natural order. In a society where women were expected to be the quiet guardians of the domestic hearth, seeing a woman gripping a gladius and charging across the sand was a shock to the system. They were treated like rare gems or two-headed calves, a novelty that commanded a high price and frantic anticipation. But who were they? The answer is as complex as the empire itself. Some were the wretched of the earth, prisoners of war dragged from the edges of the known world, or slaves forced into the ludus by masters looking to turn a profit on their flesh. For them, the arena was not a choice, it was a lingering execution. However, the Roman historian Cassius Dio records a far more unsettling reality. He documented that women from the upper echelons of society, wealthy, noble-born, and free, voluntarily stepped into the ring. Imagine the scandal, a woman who slept in silk and drank from silver goblets, choosing to trade her privilege for the stench of the barracks and the risk of disembowelment. Why would they do it? For the same drug that hooked the men, the adoration of the crowd, the deafening applause that washes over you like a physical wave, the immortality of fame. Cassius Dio notes that these women fought not for survival, but for glory. They were adrenaline junkies in an era before extreme sports, willing to violate every social taboo of Rome to feel the electric charge of combat. But make no mistake, whether princess or prisoner, once they entered the training grounds, the glamour evaporated. The life of a female gladiator was a grueling existence defined by pain. They were not given lighter swords or softer training regimens. They were thrown into the specialized schools known as ludi, where the only law was the word of the lanista, the trainer. Picture the scene. The pre-dawn mist hanging over the training yard, the sound of wooden practice swords, called rudis, clacking rhythmically against wooden posts. Their muscles would ache from hours of drills, their hands calloused and blistered from gripping the hilt. They learned to thrust, to parry, and to kill with efficiency. The Roman writer Petronius, in his work Satyricon, explicitly mentions these female fighters, describing a ferocity that matched any man. They wielded the same heavy shields, the same spears, and wore the same helmets that limited their vision to a narrow slit of terror. The training was a systematic breaking of the human spirit to rebuild it as a weapon. Failure in the ludus didn't just mean a bad day at the office, it meant severe physical punishment or death. They were property, their bodies were investments, and when they walked out of the darkness of the holding cells and into the blinding light of the arena, they had to be worth the price of admission. But human opponents were not the only terror awaiting them. The Romans had an insatiable appetite for the venationes, the wild beast hunts. In these grim spectacles, nature itself was the enemy. The floor of the arena would be transformed with artificial trees and rocks to mimic a wilderness, and then the trapdoors would open. Up from the hypogeum, the underground labyrinth, would spring lions, tigers, and boars, starved to the point of madness. While records are sparse, the evidence is etched in stone. Mosaics and inscriptions found in the ancient city of Halicarnassus depict women armed with spears, locked in a dance of death with wild beasts. This was the ultimate dominance hierarchy, Rome conquering nature and women conquering the beasts. However, historians suggest a grim distinction here. While noble women might duel another gladiator for sport, the venationes were often reserved for the expendable, the slaves and criminals. To see a woman mauled by a lion was a specific kind of horror, a sensory overload of shock and thrill that the Roman producers knew would keep the audience glued to their seats. It was a display of raw vulnerability meeting primal violence. And speaking of vulnerability, we must address the visual reality of these fights. It is a widely held belief among historians that female gladiators, like their male counterparts, fought topless. In the modern world, this sounds purely like erotica, but in the context of the Roman arena, it was a complex symbol. The male gladiator fought bare-chested to show he had no armor to hide behind, to display his willingness to bleed. For women, this unarmored appearance certainly heightened the erotic charge of the spectacle, the juxtaposition of soft femininity and hard steel, but it also served to emphasize their vulnerability. Every scar was visible, every flex of muscle was scrutinized. In the highly publicized, high-definition world of the arena, nothing was hidden. This exposure, however, drew the ire of Rome's moral guardians. The satirist Juvenal, writing in his satires, specifically Satire 6, poured ink filled with vitriol against these women. He viewed them as a symptom of moral decay. He describes them with disdain, mocking the way they wore helmets and struck training posts, asking how a woman wearing armor could ever exhibit modesty. To Juvenal, a woman in the arena was a monstrosity, a rejection of her biological nature. But the crowds didn't care about Juvenal's morals, they cared about the show. And no show was more legendary than the bout between the two most famous female gladiators in history, Amazon and Achillea. Their names alone tell a story of mythic proportions. Amazon calls to mind the legendary warrior women of Greek mythology who fought Hercules. Achillea is a feminized homage to Achilles, the greatest killer of the Trojan War. These were not just stage names, they were personas, carefully crafted to evoke the age of heroes. We know of them because of a remarkable artifact, a marble relief dating to the 2nd century AD, discovered in Halicarnassus, modern-day Bodrum, Turkey, and now housed within the silent halls of the British Museum. The carving freezes a moment of intense violence. The two women are depicted with their shields raised, swords drawn, bodies tense with the exertion of combat. They are fighting without helmets, allowing the spectators to see their faces, their intensity, and their gender. The most fascinating detail of this relief is the inscription at their feet, which records the outcome of the match. It reads, "Missio." In the vocabulary of the arena, this means a standing release or a draw. This is incredibly rare. It implies that Amazon and Achillea were so evenly matched, so skilled, and fought with such tenacity that neither could overcome the other. The crowd, likely driven into a frenzy by their skill, would have shouted for their release. They both walked out of that arena alive, having earned the ultimate respect of the mob. It stands as concrete physical proof that women were not just victims in the arena, they were champions. Yet all spectacles must end. As the empire aged, the novelty of the female gladiator began to sour in the eyes of the ruling elite. The sight of women engaging in blood sport began to be viewed not as a thrilling curiosity, but as a stain on the honor of Rome. It challenged the patriarchal structure too aggressively. It blurred the lines between the sexes too boldly. This brings us back to the year 200 AD. Emperor Septimius Severus, a man focused on restoring discipline and traditional values to a wobbling empire, took action. Echoing the sentiments of conservatives who felt the practice was a disgrace to Roman dignity, he issued a decree. The ban was official. No longer would the cries of women warriors mix with the roar of the crowd. The schools were shuttered to them, the armor was hung up. Septimius Severus feared that if women could be warriors, the social fabric of the state would unravel. By 200 AD, the era of the Gladiatrix was effectively over, relegated to the history books and the silent carvings of marble reliefs. The story of the female gladiator challenges everything we think we know about the ancient world. It reminds us that history is not just a list of dates and battles, but a tapestry of human experience, of sweat, fear, ambition, and the desperate desire to be remembered. From the noble women seeking a thrill to the slaves fighting for one more day of life, they broke the mold of their time. If you want to uncover more secrets buried in the sands of the past, make sure to subscribe to the channel and ring the bell for more documentaries that bring the dark corners of history into the light.
Please like and subscribe my YouTube channel History Quest Archives for more video.